Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with a question that has been just bugging me increasingly over the last few years, even more so after that coup attempt last January. And it is this. Has America become ungovernable? Now, just hold on. Just let me tease this out a little bit. President Joe Biden won the 2020 election with more than 81 million votes, 7 million more than Donald Trump got. A clear majority on an agenda that includes things that are demonstrably popular with Americans, like protecting your right to vote. 62% of voters support making it illegal to prevent someone from registering to vote. Police reform, particularly after the George Floyd murder, more than 2/3 of Americans say our criminal justice system needs either a complete overhaul or major changes. There's also gun reform, not ending gun ownership or confiscating people's firearms. Most Americans don't want that. But just making it so that our kids don't have to do active shooter drills and we can go to a Walmart in Texas or on the New York subway without having to duck and cover from some mass shooter with an AR-15. A majority of Americans think gun laws in this country should be more strict. That has 53% support. Majorities of women and men support women having a right to choose when it comes to pregnancy. And that number goes up even more when it comes to women and girls who have been victimized by rape or incest. There's also all that stuff that was in the Build Back Better bill, things Americans like expanding Medicare coverage and universal pre-K and making prescription drugs affordable and reducing the cost of health plans under the ACA, extending the child tax credit and fighting climate change by investing in clean energy and away from dirty fossil fuels, all that popular stuff. And despite what Republicans try to tell you, the vast majority of Americans support some form of student debt forgiveness, especially younger Americans. Yet none of those things are law, and none of them are likely to become law, despite Democrats narrowly controlling both branches of the federal legislature and the White House. Why? Because one or two senators can literally shut down every one of those things over the will of hundreds of representatives in the House, which has passed most of the things I just mentioned. And without 60 senators' approval, 327 million Americans cannot have nice things. Oh, and one of our two viable political parties planned an actual insurrection and are probably going to do it again. So I ask again, is America at this point in our history, and with a system that was designed by European men who certainly never envisioned racial and gender equality or the kind of diversity that we have today, or that anyone not like them would ever share power in this country, are we ungovernable? Joining me now is my friend Lawrence O'Donnell, host of The Last Word here on MSNBC. All right, Lawrence, talk me down if you can.
Thanks for giving me a nice, easy subject.
We would like to keep it simple.
This is simply the biggest subject I've ever discussed on television. It is an enormous question, and for some periods of our history, the country did seem reasonably governable and reasonably well governed if you were white and if you had property. And but then, as the Civil War approached, slavery was tearing the country apart, and it seemed like, no, this is a gigantic issue on which two different sections of the country have completely different views. To the point that a group of the states said, you know what? We don't think this can be a country.
Right.
We're going to call ourselves the Confederate States. So we saw that belief took hold very strongly that no, it cannot be. You're asking this one place to absorb too much conflicting thought. Mm-hmm. And so you look at the United States now, and you say, well, we certainly are not governing as a country.
Right.
The governable question is clearly one that begins with we're not governing.
Yeah.
So on something like abortion, mm-hmm. the notion that, well, in some states you have certain rights and in other states you don't have the same rights, is the kind of thing that literally defines different countries.
Right.
That's right. Why there's a Luxembourg and a Belgium.
Right.
Instead of let's just put them all together.
Right.
But it's not just that. It's this other thing that's been with us forever that no one even notices as uniquely peculiar to the United States of America. How much your tax burden is depends on where you live.
Right.
It depends on the state government that you live under. And there are states that have no income tax. There are states that have much higher sales taxes, states with higher property taxes than other taxes. And that's another thing that defines elsewhere in the world
different
separate countries.
Right.
And so we have these really peculiar things that have developed because we have these 50 different governments within the federal government that make this place behave as more than one country, and then always, we must live under this sort of faith and declaration that we are one country. And I say it is both a declaration and true, and it's a law, but there's also a faith element to it.
Yeah.
There's that thing, and it comes out when people say things like, oh, we're better than this.
Yeah.
Well, maybe in your neighborhood you are,
right.
or maybe in your state you are.
Yeah.
But no, who's the we that you're talking about when you say that? And that's an expression of faith about who we, America, is as a group of people. And so this has been, we're now in a period where questioning the very governability of the 50 states is a very, very ripe question. And we go through decades where it doesn't feel like a reasonable question at all. You know, it feels like, oh no, we're kind of moving along, and that was a struggle, and we got that, and then they did get voting rights in '65. You know, you do these things that make you feel like that America does these things, makes it feel like that it's functioning as a country and progressing. And then you have these fantastic national successes like the space program, and, you know, the first person to set foot on the moon and all that. And that's that's a national effort. That was a 50-state effort with talent from 50 states. And so there's all those rallying moments, you know, in our history where you can absolutely, there's no doubt about it. You know,
well, can I ask you about that? Because the rallying moments you're talking about took place at a time, and I feel like this is part of the challenge for Joe Biden. The time when Biden grew up, and the time he recalls the Kennedy era, right? That was a time when there was almost no gender or racial diversity in the main legislative bodies. Right? We're an anti-majoritarian government. It's designed to be anti-majoritarian on purpose. Right. But the only agreements that had to be made had to be made between this old white guy and that old white guy. And this old white guy and that old white guy could go have a cigar and decide, well, fundamentally, we agree on basically the same things. It gets a lot more difficult to even do this. I doubt you could do the space program now, because you'd have one, you know, Joe Manchin saying, well, no, because I don't want this and I don't like the spending. And then you'd have Republicans saying, no, we don't want to do anything because a Democrat is president, therefore no space program, right? And then you have African Americans, Latinos, LGBTQ people who aren't even in the room. That infrastructure bill, they weren't even in the room when they divided up $1.7 trillion. So to me, with the diversity of the country and the different interests, and then one party saying they don't even care about democracy at all, how do you actually get the Senate? Let's just say the Senate. The Senate is ungovernable.
Well, the Senate, now the case closed, the Senate is a disaster. It is a structural disaster. It was a disaster at birth, but it got away with it for a very long time, this notion of 2 per state. The founders never dreamed there was going to be a place with this name, California, with all these Spanish place names within it, that was going to have a population, you know, that approached the size of France. They didn't think they were going to have states like that. You know, New York was your kind of biggest thing at the time, and it wasn't that much bigger than the other ones. And so the 2 per state thing has become an utter disaster. And that, you know, working, you know, across the street there in the United States Senate in the 1990s was when I really started to get focused on this subject, because I was working for a big state, right? I was working for New York State, working for Senator Moynihan, and you're looking at you know, funding issues for mass transit, and it's being held up by Alabama. And you go, now, just a minute. First of all, the funding for this is all coming from the rich states like New York and California. Anyway, and how does this happen? And so it's a fundamentally and relentlessly and permanently anti-democratic institution. And more people are going to always vote for Democratic senators in the United States Senate, even when they end up with less Democratic senators in the Senate, because the Dakotas, you know, get 4 senators. You know, there's populations the size of Staten Island that get 2 senators.
Well, so then in something like student loans, let's talk for specific. Let's drill down to one specific issue. It would be enormously politically helpful for Joe Biden if he could get student loan forgiveness, because one of the reasons he's underwater with young voters is the stuff that he ran on. You know, police reform didn't pass. You know, all the stuff we mentioned at the top did not pass. But this would actually materially help millions of people who are millennials and younger. And just a lot of people of color. It would just help him politically. He cannot pass it because Joe Manchin is going to say no. What do we do about that?
Well, you know, I see, one thing I'd like to do about it is I would like to ask the voters who say, unless you forgive my student loans or a significant portion thereof, I am not going to vote for you. I'm going to ask them how that became their single issue in the United States of America. And are they willing to let everything else be handed over to the Republican Party? The Republican Party isn't going to forgive one penny of your student loans. And so there's this very peculiar notion that I guess you can determine in polls that Democratic voters, or there's a group of Democratic voters who are purely transactional, purely, 100%. It's you forgive my student loans and I vote for you. And if you don't, I don't care who's on the Supreme Court, and I don't care who any of the federal judges are anywhere, ever, and I don't care about anything else. You know who doesn't vote like that?
Republicans.
Republicans.
No.
Ever.
Ever.
And oh, by the way, you make the Republican voters get promises. The promises are not delivered except the tax cut promise.
Right.
They always deliver that one, and they don't deliver any other ones. And the Republican voters say, okay, when do you want me to vote again?
Yeah.
For a Republican who will not build the wall, who will not do X, but I'm going to vote for that person because their votes actually are not transactional in the way that we are assuming that student loan vote is.
Yeah.